we will have learned, importantly, what climate smart farming means, what climate smart alternatives are to farming, our jobs as climate smart agronomists, how we can begin to encourage more food security by farming in a more natural and more environmentally friendly way. There are a lot of challenges the world is going through. I shared an article to the WhatsApp group. I don't know if we read it yesterday night. The United Nations is recording that in the next 30 to 50 years, the population of the world is nearing 9 billion, rather. And at such a time, when the population of the world is at that number, we should have been able to double our food production from what it currently is, if not triple it. And the current trends are that instead of doubling it or tripling it, we're currently experiencing a downturn. And there are a lot of things this has been tied to. Largely, it's decline in ecological balance. It's largely a decline in harmony between nature and man. We're facing crises from rural and community clashes as a result of diminishing resources, as we see common in Nigeria and in the north and north central Nigeria from clashes with herdsmen. I'm sure a lot of people would have been wondering, the herdsmen and communities have lived side by side for so long. What's the sudden challenge? Of course, there are other reasons. But one key reason a lot of people are neglecting is the fact that resources are diminishing. Cattle rearers have to feed their cows, and they feed them on free range. In other words, the size of available land that they can continue to roam freely and feed their cows is diminishing from industrializations, from human settlements, from expansion in agricultural activities. So there's definitely going to be a clash. Now, the cattle headmen's communal clashes is just one. We were witness to the crisis in Europe, essentially between Russia and Ukraine, and recently Israel and their neighbor, Palestinian neighbors. Now, all these things are regional crises, regional challenges, but with global impact. And then when you add on top of that, the diminishing fertility of our soils, the explosion in diseases, a lot of diseases emerging that we've not been witness to. And there is, importantly, an anomaly we're experiencing in the weather patterns. Rains are either coming too early now, or they are stopping abruptly, or they are falling at the wrong time. For example, when farmers need rains, the rains don't come. When they plant, the rains come and are so intense, and there are floods, flash floods. Now, we could be diabolical in our interpretation of these things. We could be spiritual, but also importantly, we are failing to look at the clear influence of man destabilizing the natural harmony of life, the patterns to which events should flow. And so this training today, at the ending, there are a number of things in the next 3 days we hope to achieve. And as we engage, we will know more of these things. But importantly, I didn't want this training to be all about talk and no action. I'm hoping that we can drive a desire for more research, for more interest, and importantly, we can trickle your interest to begin to think and farm in a different way. And how is that going to be done? They're saying that a drop of pebble in a river ripples across the entire body. We might be 10 trained climate smart agronomists. We might be 14 or 15, we might be less than that. But the most important thing is at the end of the day, we desire to impact our environment. We desire to impact farmers. We desire to help farmers begin to understand that there are better ways to farming these days. Help our environment to begin to understand that we are interested in seeing it heal. We're interested in healing it from the excessive exploitation of man. And the beautiful thing about smallholder farmers, which are largely what we practice in this part of the world, is that they exist in communities. Some people call them smallholder family farmers because they are clusters of families. They exist in networks. And if we're able to impact the life of farmer A, and farmer A impacts the life of farmer B in little or no time, we should have largely rippled across our regions. So don't look down on what we're about to start. Everything starts from somewhere. And just before we commence our meeting today, sorry. Let me get this right. Um, can I be heard? Can I be heard? I just need a feedback that I can be heard.
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
All right, thank you.
We can hear you.
Maria, good to see you. I'd like to share a research I read recently before we go ahead with the training. Can my screen be clearly seen?
Yes, we are seeing.
Excellent. All right. This research, it's about the power of knowledge. It's about the power of information. It's about the power of how knowledge is truly power. A group of researchers examined 100 house cleaners. They looked into the activities of house cleaners in the Western world, what we call nannies here, or domestic staff. They wanted to see their understanding of information. So they questioned 100 of them, and they realized they were overweight. Because I help me with muting people who are on mute. They wanted to see why a lot of housekeepers were overweight, and they interacted with them and found out that so most of them complained. They said, oh, well, we're too busy. We spend nearly 9 hours every day cleaning hotels, cleaning houses, cleaning homes. We barely have time to go to the gym to exercise. We barely have time to go for a walk, go for a stroll, take a jog. And these researchers separated this group of house cleaners into two groups. To the first 100, they informed them that, look, by merely just cleaning a house, walking up and down a staircase for 9 hours in a day, it's more than enough to help you lose weight. It's a lot of work. Most athletes don't even exercise for up to 9 hours in a day. And these house cleaners were amazed by that. And by that knowledge, as they go about work, they see it as exercise, they see it as fun, they see it as something that will help them work, earn money, and equally lose weight. And to the other 100, they didn't tell them anything. They just told them, oh, well, sorry, we wish we could help you. And they allowed them to go about their business for over 2 months. And after 2 months, this same 200 participants in this research, data on their weight was collected, data on their blood sugar level was collected, data on their blood pressure was collected. And the researchers discovered something staggering. The 100 home cleaners, domestic staffs who were informed that by just walking for 9 hours in a hotel, by walking for 9 hours cleaning a home, by going up and down stairs is enough, more than enough for you to exercise yourself and be healthy. They discovered these 100 participants were more healthy. They discovered a lot of them has lost weight. Their blood sugar was normal. They discovered a lot of them had better blood pressures, a lot of other vitals. And to the 100 that they did not inform and they were sympathetic with and said, oh, sorry, we wish we could help. The data was interesting. I'm sure someone will already be guessing what was the result. Their blood pressure was high. Their sugar was near diabetic. They were overweight. And research is interesting because we can draw a lot of conclusions and parallels from it. These researchers were able to conclude that just by the mere knowledge, by the group of 100 participants, that their job alone was enough to be exercised to them, they begin to consciously see their work as something that they can equally take advantage with to be healthy. And because of that information, just information, they didn't do any other thing. They didn't take them out to exercise. They didn't ask them to eat healthy. They just informed them. Where am I getting to with all this? Our hope is that as you are trained today, tomorrow, and next, and subsequently for the rest of this program, you interact with farmers, you interact with consumers, you interact with your neighbors, you interact with your friends, but importantly, farmers. You need to know that what you're taking to them, it's power. What you're taking to them, it's transformative. What you're taking to them is something that will change their lives. And if you don't first believe in it, you can't impact them. You have to understand that the farmer out there who is farming in a non-climate smart approach is doing it for a reason. It's possible he doesn't know a better way. It's possible he or she or the group doesn't believe it works. It's possible they've tried it and it has failed. And so you need to first know that you are taking a transformative knowledge to them. So that being said, we'll get ahead with the training today. We'll learn a lot of things, but there are 3 core topics we'll be learning. The first one is we're going to be introduced to conservation agriculture. A synonym for conservation agriculture is climate smart agriculture. We need to know what climate smart agriculture is. You know, the word climate and then the word smart. Smart, what comes to mind? You're thinking in a better way. You're thinking in a way that is more conserved, in a way that is more practical and result-oriented. And so we will find out what climate smart agriculture essentially entails. We'll find out some ideas that all over the world people are practicing and that is helping them. We also get to understand the soil, which is the core of the essence of life on Earth. which is like a womb to every man, every woman, every living being on earth. We get to understand the soil and understand that the soil is a living being. It's not just dirt we step on. It's not just somewhere we dig to construct, we dig to plant, we till to farm. No, it's a living system, and every intricate aspect of it uh, must function in harmony. And once one side fails, it impacts the entire system. And then finally, we'll come to understand some common conservation agricultural practices, very simple ones. And I'd like to mention that at the end of this training today, we'll be tasked with some activities that tomorrow we will interact on. I want you to relax. I want you to sit back. You come for trainings like this, you want to come with a notebook. Well, thank God for internet and the digital age. We're recording this meeting. We'll have it shared with you. These slides will be shared to the group. And there's a wealth of knowledge, but it's for who's hungry. I want you to feel free on the chat button. If you have any question, feel free to drop those questions. When we get to the Q&A section, we will respond to those questions. Don't hold on to them. Just type them there. We'll go through them and answer them. If you have any observation, feel free to Lucas, help me admit. I want to focus on teaching. Thank you. So we'll go on. And so the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations defines climate smart agriculture as the approach or any approach or technique that seeks to transform agri-food systems towards a more green and a more practical approach. It involves any and all agricultural systems that prioritize the 17 charters of the United Nations. Can anyone remember what those 17 charters are? It's a very important aspect I think we shouldn't just talk over. The United Nations have 17 charters, 17 goals. They used to be called the Millennium Development Goals, but today we know them as the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. These charters talks about a number of things. For the benefit of time, I couldn't put all that there, but I like to just read them out so that we know from my phone. I don't want to assume that we know what these 17 goals are, but the aim of these goals essentially is to bring life to function in a more harmonic way with nature and give justice to every member of the earth. Understand that every aspect of life matters, and for everything we do, there is always an opposite and corresponding action. The first goal talks about that in the next 30 to 50 years, the United Nations is hoping that all over the world we will achieve a net zero poverty rate. It's an ambitious dream. It's an ambitious goal. I'm just thinking if not obtainable with the way things are going. Goal 2 talks about zero hunger. Essentially, what this means is that in the next 30 to 50 years, we will bring humanity to a point where nobody is poor, nobody is hungry. That's an ambition that is really high, and I hope we achieve it. Goal 3 talks about good health and well-being. I just read through them. Goal 4 talks about quality education for all. Goal 5 talks about gender equality, which is very important. They adjusted this to be gender equity, which is very important to the trainings we're having. If you travel across North Central Nigeria, I traveled across Northern Nigeria, you appreciate women. Some of my business operations is around the plateau. And it might interest you to know that women are the farmers in the plateau. Women are the one who owns all the farms, who till the soils, who take care of homes and grow the food we all eat. And so you can imagine in an environment where women are not having access to land, women are not having access to inputs, women are being distracted by domestic violence, invariably is going to affect our food security. And so that's something to think on. Then Goal 6 talks about clean water and sanitation. Who would believe a time will come across the world when water is so unclean, either it's polluted by industrial waste, or it's polluted by microplastics, or it's polluted by agrochemicals, which farmers are using. You know, this clean water and sanitation applies to us a lot because one of the growing challenge with agricultural production all over the world right now, it's pollution from excess runoffs of excessive use of agrochemicals. Remember, initially I talked about the growing weather anomalies. We're experiencing flash floods. And as we use our inputs in the farm, recently we heard that Nigerian government through NAFDAC has put a ban on any sales as well as production of the popular herbicide used in farms called Gramazole. It's a quick action herbicide. This is no news. And we're wondering why things like this are done. The reason is simple. Paraquat, which is the active ingredient in Gramazole, its residual effect is high and its environmental impacting effect is long lasting. And so when we use these chemicals in our fields and rain washes them off, if you look at the topography of every farm, there's always a drainage going through it. Rain washes them off from our farms to the rivers. From the rivers, it flows to neighbors who have no history of what activities were done around the river, and they drink it. And no wonder we're beginning to see and hear of cases of cancer exploding and proliferating in particularly the women, in children, which hasn't been a thing from the past. If you check Nigerian Health Journal for the past 50, 100 years, cancer was rare, and today is common. These things matter, how we respond to our environment. So I proceed to the 7th goal of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It talks about affordable and clean energy. You know, I enjoyed the recording from the radio program that was done in Gombe by the team. And they were stressing essentially on the fact that we will soon approach a time when there are no trees out there in the wild anymore for us to cut to either make charcoal or to cook. Question is why? Because we're falling more trees to cook, more trees to sell as charcoal, more trees to build homes, more trees to export than we're planting. This comes in key in this region. And so this goal is setting an ambitious desire that will come to a point in the next 30 to 50 years where we are able to have clean energy for everyone, have everybody an access, cheap and affordable and clean energy. We'll get into talk more on that. Goal 8 talks about decent work and economic growth for everyone. You know, how does this concern us? We are an agrarian nation. Whether you know it or not, there is a part of you that has something to do with agriculture. Someone is farming that you know. Someone in your family is a farmer. And sometimes these jobs are done in a very unprofessional level because people do them not because they're passionate about them, but because it's a last resort to survive. Imagine a world where everyone have access to clean, to affordable and fair economic environment where they can work and do business. And the next goal 9, I rush through them now for time. It says industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Goal 7 talks about reduce inequalities. We talked about that already. 11 talks about sustainable cities. I remember my first day visiting Gombe. I saw that the government was doing a lot to plant trees. And I don't know what the current government is doing about those trees because the last time I was there, I began to see people fall them. But I hope that if we appreciate these trees, the next 5-10 years, when the city is enjoying the impacts of these trees, we'll look back one day to say someone invested in these trees. Someone spent money to water these trees during the dry season. Someone watched over them to ensure they are not indiscriminately cut. The 12 talks about responsible consumption and production. Oh, what a good. Being fair to everything you do, being just, knowing that you're not the only one on earth. There are generations coming after us. I think this goal for me is one of the greatest goals. It calls humanity to reflect on the need for conservation. I can't live my life today knowing that after I consume everything, the next generation coming, there's nothing for them. That's crisis in the making. Goal 13 talks about climate action, which is part of what we're doing, creating awareness, getting people trained, spending money and resources to equip people, to train them so that they can train other people, so that they can educate other people, so that they can empower other people with the knowledge. Remember the research we talked about? Knowledge transforms us. Knowledge gives us an edge over others. Knowledge puts us in a position where we change our activities, we change our actions, we change our response to situations and circumstances. Goal 14 talks about life below water, still aquatic life. It's a different world altogether. 15 talks about life on land. I'm going to drop this on the WhatsApp group so that we can have time to really reflect on them. It talks about life on land, goal 15, life on land, the wildlife, the animals. You know, I want to reflect back on outbreaks of diseases. Remember when Corona was the in thing? Remember when it was Ebola? They linked it to wildlife being destabilized. It was never designed natural for bats to live with man. It was never designed for certain, in zoology, there's what they call zoonosis. Essentially what zoonosis is about is a merging point between the zoological environment and man. Diseases that are that of animals interfacing with that of man. And then there's what they call opportunistic infections. You're not supposed to have any intimate business with bats or wildlife. And then you go spend time with them because either accidentally or because of man destabilizing nature, and bats have no place to stay in the wild. And so they come live with us and they drop their feces and we eat the food that's contaminated with the feces. And then there's a disease that's supposed to be endemic entirely to bats, and then it begins to express itself on man. And man have no solution to it. He has no idea about this disease because he's never interfaced with it. And the entire world went through a crisis in Ebola. The entire world went through a crisis in Lassa. The entire world went through a crisis with the Black Plague. Went through crisis with Corona. And if you remember the history, they were pointing to the lifestyle of the Chinese. They're pointing to the lifestyle of the South Chinese regions. They say these people were eating a lot of wildlife. They were destroying habitats, and they were interfacing moments between man and wildlife. These things have consequences. And so when we're talking about climate smart, one of the things that comes to mind is we need to be conscious that for everything we do, if we're not careful, if we're not smart about it, there is a corresponding result. These are lots and lots of examples about how we have not been smart with our environment, how we've not been smart with how we farm, how we've not been smart with how we cultivate. We are suffering consequences. And the entire aim of this training is to bring us to a point where we now begin to find what are these alternatives? What are the smart ways we can farm? What are the smart ways we can interact with our wildlife? What are the smart ways we can use Earth's resources and be conscious? There's a picture on the screen. As I talk, I keep staring at it. This picture was taken in a village in Plateau, Shandam, Shimankat. What is going on here is it's an interesting parallel we will talk about. I want us to reflect and see what's going on here. There's nothing in this field that is new to us. We know maize husk, maize waste. We know dry, scorched environment around us. But is there a way we've been utilizing this simple, cheap, affordable maize waste from our farms? Is there a better way, rather, that we could utilize them, like this farmer is doing? Or have we been burning them? Or have we been opening up our fields after harvest for cows to just move in and mow them and eat them, and then the entire field is exposed? Is there a natural way we can take advantage of this so-called waste from our environment and put them to use to better life? These are very practical examples we'll learn as this training goes on. Goal 16, the penultimate one. It talks about peace, justice, and strong institution. And the final goal talks about a partnership for these goals. We all are partners in this dream to bring the world to an environment, to a state where there is harmony, there is coherence. And so to conclude on this very topic of climate smart agriculture, a more appropriate term for climate smart agriculture from all I've explained, if you listen, for lack of a better word, a more important word or a more explainable way to call climate smart agriculture is conservation agriculture. So I'll be using this word interchangeably. And so don't get confused if you hear climate smart, if you hear uh, conservation. But to put it in a better context, climate smart, we're talking about climate. How do we function in a smart way to preserve our climate? In other words, how do we practice conservation? The word conserve, manage. Oh, I have 5 cubes of sugar. I'll be hungry for the next 5 days. The only food I have is tea and sugar. Do I take all the 5 cubes of sugar to make my tea sweet today? Or can I discipline myself to take a cube every day and have sugar to last me for 5 days? This is practical conservation. Another person will say, oh, well, I can even break my cubes of sugar into half and have a half today and half tomorrow and a half cubes of sugar for 10 days. Another person will say, well, I can do sugar today and starve my body of sugar tomorrow and have this. Before you know, you will have different parameters, different analogy, different options and alternatives to manage your 10 cube of or 5 cube of sugar for 30 days. You know, I'm breaking these things into very simple terms so we can understand the word conservation and how practical it is. Because when you look at cubes of sugar in the context of the analogy I gave, it might sound like it's simple, but that's what we do every day when we go to the field and we mow down all the trees. That's what we do every day when we go to the field and we lump our soils with excessive urea, which is making our soil very salty. There is a research we're currently doing in Kaduna. Let me digress a bit and talk about it, but it's part of what we'll train tomorrow on. I don't know if anyone in the hall or in this training has heard of the crisis in Kaduna ginger. It's all over the news. And I can guarantee us it did not start this year. It didn't start last year. It didn't start last 10 years. You know, Nigerian is known to have the world's spiciest ginger. It's a national heritage you have. You can't grow ginger anywhere on earth. I don't know how God did this, but there's a unique blend between the micro flora and faunas of southern Kaduna, essentially Kaduna, and the soil type and a lot of intricacies. It produces the world's spiciest ginger. That's a heritage we should treasure and hold on to. So the whole world flocks to Nigeria to make sure they have a hold of our ginger. And this year, gingers all over Kaduna were burnt, not by fire, not by any chemicals, just by a disease outbreak. And farmers had no clue, the leaders had no clue how to fix it. The researchers were struggling before products and results from the research could come. The farm season is past because research is not quick fix. It takes time. And what were our findings from this research? We discovered that for the past 50 years, ginger farmers in Kaduna were continuing to farm ginger on the same piece of land. Diseases were building up. Concentration of chemicals, excessive and abusive use of chemicals to grow these gingers on the same piece of land were building up. The soil became very acidic. The soil became overly loaded with diseases. And the day just came and the gingers couldn't survive on the land anymore. These are very practical terms because Kaduna farmers were not smart in their farming, or rather they were not climate oriented. They were not climate smart in their approach to farming, or they were rather, to better put it, they were not climate conscious in their farming. They did not take conservation into practice. Anyone remember crop rotation, elementary agriculture biology? Where they say, oh, this year you farm this, next year you farm that. There's a way it balances things. There's a disease that is attacking your maize this year. It's going to winter on your maize stock when you harvest your maize, hoping that next year when you farm maize, it will feed on it. But when you surprise the disease by farming beans It's not used to eating beans. It's a way to control the disease naturally without spraying anything. And these things work. We see examples. There are people practicing them and they're getting results. And so you see that simple action of rotating your crop eliminates excessive use of chemicals. And if you are eliminating that, you are not sterilizing your soil. Crop rotation, importantly, also feeds the soil with nitrogen. Talk about nitrogen fixation in legumes. Very interesting topic we'll look at as we go on. That maize, for example, of a cereal crops. In this training, I understand that essentially some of the key crops we'll be talking about is rice and maize, but we'll touch on other crops too because they're important. So a lot of our examples will be centered around cereals for rice, maize essentially, and then legumes we may look at beans because these regions also grow beans and groundnut and soybeans and a number of other crops. And so we understand that when we cereal crops essentially are nitrogen consuming crops. And so when you're growing a nitrogen consuming crop in a land continuously, two things happen. The nitrogen in the soil is depleted. That's one aspect. And then the modern agricultural practice has given us urea in the form of nitrogen, which we buy commercially and apply to the soil. And I recall in our training early this year, we're talking about when you look at the bag of urea, it's branded for 6% nitrogen. And a smart farmer wants to wonder what's the remaining balance on that 46 to make it 100%. You know, I precosh to go and research that and find out. But essentially, farmers in the north are prone to doing that. When you're selling fertilizer to them, the first thing they want to do is to test it to see if it has urea because they know the taste is salty. And, you know, that's truly salt. And anyone ever dropped salt on earthworm before? We'll come to that. Soil microorganisms. Very important aspect of conservation agriculture. Very important aspect of if we will truly practice climate smart agriculture. We must be conscious of what we're putting in our soil because these things are either going to help our soil to be more fertile, to be more alive, to be more healthy. Remember, we talked about soil being the living system. All this thing is going to destroy our soil. It's going to kill the life forms in it. And so we go back to discussion on the slide. It takes into account the need for resource management in such a way that much is achieved from little, and such resources can continue to be used sustainably within the next generation. This just essentially explained conservation. It just explained a climate smart approach to managing Earth's resources. We don't want to take everything today. We want to use them such that there is continuity. For lack of a better word, there is sustainability. You know, initially I shared the statistics from the United Nations. Remember the one I pointed on the WhatsApp group yesterday? Is estimating that we will be 9 billion in the next 30 to 50 years, if not way earlier than that. And the current production of food, look, Nigeria as a nation itself hasn't been able to sustain itself. How do we even feed the world? And we have more arable land than anyone else has in sub-Saharan Africa. We have very healthy soil. You look at the statistics of the Nigerian soil. When we were developing rich yield organic NPK fertilizer, we went through the stress of taking soil samples from, I know it now, 774 local governments of Nigeria. The research it's amazing. We were able to identify microorganisms that are found nowhere on Earth, beneficial soil microorganisms. That's a topic we can't exhaust. Soil microorganisms, very powerful, very useful. Microorganisms that are able to synthesize and fix nitrogen that are found nowhere, not the regular nitrosomonas, nitrobacters that we know. New strains were identified sulfur-fixing bacteria, all endemic to Nigeria and found nowhere else on Earth. We identified microorganisms that are able to not just fix nitrogen, but make them available in forms that plants can easily access them through a partnership between what fungi hyphae, mycorrhiza. It's a really symbiotic. Symbiotic is a big grammar for a cordial, friendly relationship between microorganisms. I don't want to assume everybody in this meeting have an agricultural scientific background, but essentially, symbiosis just explains a simple, friendly relationship. Microorganisms say, oh, you can do this, I can do this. You can't do that, I can't do that, but since you can do this, why don't we synchronize? Why don't we bond together? So you help me do what you can do and I do what I can. Simple partnership. And so Nigeria is rich with a lot of resources. We look at the environmental resources. The most important ones we stress is our oil, is our forest, is our wildlife. But some things we don't see is our soil microorganisms. And I can guarantee you foreigners are coming here to export these things worth billions and nobody knows because they are very tiny microorganisms. So CA, which is, of course, conservation agriculture, aims to boost agricultural productivity by optimizing farm resources and helping to minimize environmental degradation via the integrated management of available resources. How do we produce more food to feed an expanding planet? How do we provide and feed a larger population with less? Remember the analogy of sugar cubes I talked about? That's it. So over 80% of the world population depends on smallholder farmers for their food. Smallholder farmers are the backbone of Nigeria. They are the backbone of sub-Saharan Africa. They're the backbone of the whole world. If you take statistical analysis of Nigerian farmers, less than 2-3% of Nigerians are even medium to large scale industrial farmers. Farmers who feed the over 200 plus million Nigerians. It's the man who farms half a plot behind you. It's the woman who farms a hectare behind you. It's the cooperative who farms 2-3 hectares behind you. And they're able to aggregate this food through the market and they're able to feed the nation. And so they are very important. And I like to stress that this training is about them. Yes, they are industrial farmers who come across, but that small baba who is behind you growing half a hectare or 2 hectares or 5 hectares of maize, he's producing food that will feed Nigeria. If he's producing his food in an environmental hazardous way, it might not concern you today, but next 2, 3, 5, 10 years, when his soil is so destroyed and he can't produce the 500 bags of maize he's harvesting every year, even with all the inputs he's spending money to put, there will be food crisis. That small mama behind you who is doing vegetables and taking them to the market every morning, she's feeding the country. If she's using a lot of chemicals to grow her vegetables, either out of ignorance or just out of greed to produce more vegetables, if it's not our business, she's poisoning the country, either known to her or unknown. This is where it talks about a joint hands to action, which is why I'm really excited about this training, where we can begin to help people understand that there are better ways to farm and still get your yield. Because when you interact with farmers all over the country, one of the things they want to let you know is, look, people have come to tell us about organic farming. People have come to tell us about climate smart farming. People have come to tell us about alternative ways to farm. This is how our fathers have been farming. We don't know any other way. Some of them will admit you can educate your people. Others will argue with you. They'll tell you these things don't work. And this is where I really crave the indulgence of management. We have to invest in demonstration farms. We have to invest in practical results that farmers will see, because our ability to teach farmers are full of doubt. Farmers are full of curiosity. They want to see solutions. They want to see results. You can tell them anything you want to tell them, but if it's not practical, they can't relate with it. So it might take time, it might take resources, but we have to join hands to invest in field demonstrations, in experience centers where farmers can come and see and know that these things work. It might not be so much. But for example, in the office in Gombe, there's some space when you enter to the left. We can set up a very simple demonstration farm there. I understand it's been done before, but we have to sustain it, because as farmers interact, as farmers come around, let them be able to see these things and say, we're not just talking it, we're not just parroting it. That's what we practice here and it works. And that's how we have to train ourselves to know how these things work, so that when we're talking to farmers, we can have results. And that's what we really give them the solution that they are looking for. So we move on to the next slide. SHF is an abbreviation for smallholder farmers, if you remember from the previous slide. Smallholder farmers are the pillars of food. I talked about this. Food security. Any negative trend, I talked about this in their activity, trickles down to all the members of society. Again, analogy of the Baba who farms maize and is using a lot of harmful inputs. It might not be your concern until he's not able to produce, and you know, like that across, and then there's a shortage in maize production. You know, I did a training with the Land Accelerator Africa through the World Resources Institute. And what Eco Farms went for that training with to talk about and encourage people on the need for us to begin to think in a different way was the fact that ability of farmers to have timely access, affordable access to the right inputs is food security. And so we can say anything we want to say and do anything we want to do until we're able to get the least smallholder farmer to have access to the right inputs. Right here means it's affordable, it's effective, it's not a fake, it's not a counterfeit, it's not adulterated. And having it in the timely manner and the right information like what we're doing today and about to do from every other person is what guarantees us food security. I give you an example. One of the reasons why food is so expensive today in Nigeria is not just because the economy is bad, but the economy being bad or being tough, or the being, you know, rapid and high inflations in price of commodities is a large part of it. But how does it impact food production and then the price of food in the market? Of course, the transport, logistics, fuel touch that, I know. You see, when a farmer goes to the market to buy fertilizer and he's buying it at such an excessively high price for several reasons, he has to think the economics of his production. I used to buy you NPK at 8,000. Now it's 35,000, it's 20,000. How much am I going to sell a bag of maize to recover my investment? And so by the time he adjusts his own scale, he impacts the market. And by the time he looks inward, the next question is, how can I even produce more food with little of this fertilizer I bought so expensively? Like this year, a lot of farmers couldn't afford inputs. So the prediction was that a lot of food production would drop because farmers just couldn't keep up with buying today you go to the market, you say urea is 20,000, tomorrow it's 22. How do you keep up? So these things, they impact us. And a beautiful part of climate smart farming, which I like to point out at this moment, is that it might be slow, it might be expensive at the beginning, but if we keep at it, it's a more affordable, more environmental friendly, and a more healthy alternative. You know, we talk a lot more about yield per hectare, but the growing mainstream word now in agriculture is what is called health per hectare. How much health per hectare are we producing as Nigerians? When we look at the statistics, it's staggering. That is why Olam will invest in Nigeria for soybeans, for maize. At the end of the day, they will produce grains or feeds for animals within Nigeria. They can't export it. Why? Because our food is not very healthy. And so we're missing that premium international market. We're missing that high currency, foreign currency. All these things build on our economy. And why is our food per hectare not so healthy? Because we're not smart with our farming, because we're not embracing sustainable approaches to farming. We're still farming in a very crude and very environmental harmful ways. And as the world is moving away from a more harmful approach to managing Earth's resources, the lobbyists are pushing for people to eat more healthy. Anyone realize eating organic is now trending? Oh, I eat organic. Oh, I farm organic. Oh, my food is organic. Nobody talks chemicals. And so we hope that this training, we will learn how to impact our farmers. Remember, we talked about the smallholder farmers. They are the ones who are able to influence food production. They are the backbone of food production in Nigeria. So we can't do without them. They are our target audience. They are our students. They are our people we're going to make friends with. I had an experience young in agriculture that I like to share with people who would like to learn. When you go as learned people, when you go as smart people, when you go as people who are trained before smallholder farmers. Don't look down on them as ragged people, as poor people who are not learned, who are illiterate. Thank God these days a lot of learned people are now going to farming. Look at them as people who have had the practical experience you never had in your university training for the past 10, 20, 50 years. And when you go before them, go with your theory you've learned and little practice in class, and go with the heart to learn from them. When you have that disposition, they will be more receptive. They will open up and learn from you. And in that way, you can influence them and they can influence you. But when you go with an attitude, you have all the knowledge, you have all the experience, and you're coming to talk down at them. And to be honest, you can never learn as much as a farmer who has stayed under the sun, who has seen his crop die, who has farmed and seen his crops destroyed by flood, who has spent money buying chemicals and herbicides and fertilizers and seen his crops harvested. You can never be as experienced as he is. But there are knowledges you have that will help his growth and productivity. And if you want to really equip him or her or them, you must go with the right word is a humble heart, a humble disposition. You must go with the sense of I'm coming. Remember the symbiotic relationship. Coming with something you need. Coming with something to look for something you have, and we have to find a way to do this together. Okay, we go on. So, human civilization and industrialization has been at the center of the world's development trajectory. Over the last 200 years, economic progress globally has been unimaginable. We need to talk about that. Anyone remember the Green Revolution? I encourage us to go and read about it. I'll put it down and put up some information on that. The Green Revolution, it revolutionized agriculture. It introduced crops like drought tolerance crops. It taught us what we know today about agriculture, where we're doing irrigation. We can farm during the rain-fed farms and irrigated farms, what we call dry season and rain season farms. Food production increased, fertilizers, inputs all over the world. People had access to production. But one thing about this revolution, this explosion, this growth that we've not learned or talked about is the fact that there were some downturns to it. We had more access to water to irrigate. And so we had access to begin to harvest stored water in the soil. We had access to what we call hybrid seeds. Hybrid seeds were developed to respond more to inputs like fertilizers and resist insecticides or herbicide spray. So you have maize now that you can spray selective to kill the grasses in the field, but it won't kill the maize. But one thing that did not take into account is that this same maize is foreign to the environment is going to, so there are going to be super weeds or what we call weed resistance. Any practical farmer here ever applied a particular herbicide and realized that after applying the herbicides, the grasses died, the next batch of grasses that came out were looking so lush and they overgrew the farm? And you're wondering, did I manure the weeds in the farm? These are some of the downturns of this experience. And so equally, we have witnessed simultaneous declines in nature. Nature degraded to a degree that exposes us all to negative and irreversible impacts on people, wildlife, and the environment. That's why I just talked about there was an explosion in agricultural productivity. Yes, hunger was managed, hunger was greatly reduced. People had more access to healthy food. All over the world, people had access to all kinds of food materials. But as time went on, we began to realize that our inability to monocrop, which is an aspect we will talk about subsequently, we had to clear vast lands to be able to set up monocrops of maize, of rice, of beans. And because we cleared out those crops, those trees, microhabitats were destroyed, forest and wildlife homes were destroyed. It's just like when there's war and our homes are burnt and destroyed and we move away from there and go settle as refugees somewhere else or in IDP camps. We're never comfortable there. And because we are not comfortable there, we do all kinds of things to find comfort. And that's what's happening to wildlife. We want to set up 30 hectares of maize plantation. So we cut down 30 acres of forest. We're not worried about the monkeys there. And someone is wondering, oh, what's the importance of monkeys? Just meat. Well, we had an episode with Ebola. If you sit down to do the economics of what Ebola cost the world, you can't exhaust it. Talk about Corona. So these things are important because we talked earlier about zoonosis. Let me share an interesting research or experience I had with a mentor from Israel. The Jews went to farm. They allowed turkeys, geese, and guinea fowls to roam around their fields. And so I will observe a lot of geese and turkeys, and of course the local ones, not the hybrid ones that are Ajebo, as we call them, the local resilient ones, strolling freely about his farm. And I will ask him, what's the point? Is there anything beyond raising these animals for domestic use? And he will say, yes. The Jews believe that the disease that is supposed to impact their homes, impact their environment, impact their cubutes, impact their crops. For example, the hybrid chickens in his pen. He says these wild ones are resistant to them. So as they roam around, they pick this disease and they hold on to them. They don't give the disease access to the more vulnerable ones indoors in the pen. That's a very interesting finding. And so the point I'm trying to make is that by the time we eradicate all of wildlife, we will have more exposure to new and emerging diseases that we've not experienced before, because these wildlife, remember zoonosis, they are the ones holding us off, or rather holding this disease off from us. And because they are symptomatic, because they don't express them, or they are not disease expressive to these wild plants or wildlife, or wild animals. Anyone notice, maybe you're walking in the bush and you find what's common, maybe a rice growing in the wild all alone? Anyone notice no one is there to put fertilizer, no one is there to put manure, no one is there to put herbicides or insecticides, and the rice is doing very well all alone? And then the one you spend money to clear your field, the one you spend money to manure and take care of, that's the one that has been attacked. That's the point. Because it's in the wild, it's built resistance over the years. And so it can hold off certain diseases. So wildlife is very important. If we are really going to have solutions to the global climate crisis that we're currently facing, we must come to a point where we appreciate the relevance and the inputs of wildlife. So evidently, our economic model of growth needs a paradigm shift. Of course, it does. We have to go back to the drawing board and begin to reflect on our nature of farming. We've been farming this approach. We go to the field when the rains fall, we cut down all the grasses, we till the soil, we plant our seeds, we put our fertilizers when it's time, and we harvest and burn the field and leave the field bare again until when next rain comes. Perhaps could there be a different way to track this activity that might be more environmental friendly, that might be cheaper? Could there be an alternative way to doing this that we could get more yields, even more than what we currently have? This is what climate smart agriculture addresses. This is what conservation agriculture hopes to address. And so this model, of course, which is the training we're going through today, calls for the need to prioritize ecological conservation. Human and societal wellness at the heart of global economy. It's simply just saying we can't continue to be greedy in our productive plan. We can't continue to produce and not be interested in what's happening to our environment. We can't continue to grow food and not be conscious of and excited about making wealth and not be conscious of what's going on with our environment. We have to balance things. So we talked about what the UN predicted is there. So furthermore, human population will, have neared 9 billion. Such a population will be competing for the available resources. I talked exhaustively about this already. You have a population that is more than the available resources, definitely to be a survival of the fittest. We don't want to get there before we swing into action. And that is why we're investing in all these trainings. That's why we're coming to a point where we have to conscientize each other. We have to teach each other better and more environmental friendly ways to grow food. So if we do not develop measures to minimize weather catastrophes while meeting the needs of such populations, humanity will be faced with an existential crisis. It started. We might not have seen it at its peak yet, but it started. Let me give a very interesting example. Anyone realize that the weather in the plateau that sustains cultivation and economic productive production of Irish potato is same as the one in Gombe? In other words, you can grow Irish in an economic volume in Gombe. You can grow Irish in an economic volume in Kaduna. You can in Adamawa. Same with wheat, same with rice, same with onions. Of course, there are regions where you struggle to grow these things. But today, technology has given us room to be able to grow food in the desert. How much more states across Nigeria? But the question I keep asking farmers is, why is production of Irish potato only endemic to the plateau? Why is production of maize essentially only endemic to certain northern states? Let's pick Irish, for example, and exhaust it. So what this means is that, God forbid, if there's a major crisis in the plateau, the entire of Nigeria is cut off from food security when it comes to Irish potato. And so these are some of the thinkings I want to prick in our mind. Whoever told you that only plateau is where pear can survive, whoever told you only plateau is where Irish can survive, hasn't been sincere to you. Whoever told you plateau is only where cabbage, of course, the weather is easy. So because, forgive me to use the word, maybe we're mentally lazy, we've not explored other places. And so some of the climate smart approach to farming is not just about tweaking our farming methods or farming knowledge or practices. It's also realizing that we also need to expand more in regions. For example, I talked about ginger just now. So because the ginger in Kaduna has been affected, every woman knows when she goes to the market, ginger price will be expensive. These things are the nitty-gritty. But imagine a major crisis where the north is cut off from the rest of Nigeria, because currently when you talk about grains, cereal grains, it's from the north. Every other region of Nigeria don't seem to think in a smart way to say, well, in as much as the ball comes from the north, can we be a little bit self-sufficient perhaps from this? So these are ways to think if we really want to get smart in our farming. It includes regions, it includes farm practices, it includes weather forecast. And so the crux of our meeting today, how do we produce more food with less environmental impacts? How do we use natural resources in such a way that we can continue to sustain them for years to come? This brings us to climate conscious farming, which is a synonym for climate smart farming. We can learn a thing or two from how our early ancestors farmed and manage resources. They recycled everything. They embraced more natural techniques to farming. Of course, one key challenge to this approach was that their yields were minimal. Their yields were modest. They were not able to produce enough food for themselves. So we began to think ways to expand our food production, which is what brought us to here. But the problem, but the challenge we're having, can you mute yourself, please? The challenge we were having was that, or is that, we were destroying our environment so that we can have access to more food. And so then our early ancestors understood how to use biological resources to their benefit by cycling legumes. I took time to talk about this. Legume crops, crop rotation, crop cultivation. We talked about modest ways of cultivating crops. As we go on, we'll talk about co-cultivation, cycled cultivation, poly cultivations, pest management, integrated ways to manage pests. I mentioned them earlier when I was talking about crop rotation being a one way to manage pests. As man became more industrialized, we let go of such natural protocols for more artificial processes such as monocropping and use of systemic inputs, of course, which are artificial fertilizers. Remember, I mentioned the Green Revolution, which essentially gave us room to the monoculture we know today, and excessive and abusive use dependent on synthetic inputs. Now, what climate smart farming is calling is not that we should throw away the modern approach to farming. It's not calling to criticize the most recent and modern ways which we've farmed and we've been able to feed our world. No, what it is calling to question is that we take time to examine our modern and technologically inclined ways to farming and find how we can, remember symbiosis, integrate environmental approach to farming with the new modern approach we have. And the result is that we will have we'll have more productive, we'll have a more productive experience than what we currently are having. But if we say no, we don't want anything natural. Natural is doesn't last long. Natural doesn't last. Natural is not fast. Natural is not sustainable. And we throw away it and embrace the synthetic and the chemical and all that. We're realizing that the impact is worse. I'll give you an example. I was having a discussion with a professor who I'm doing some research with, and he was telling me that in the past 50 years, vegetables and fruits are not as nutritious as they were in the past 50 years. And I asked, what does he mean? He said he's collecting data, he's looking at data from the past 50 to 60 years, and he discovered that the nutritious content of fruits and vegetables in the past 50 to 60 years were higher, nearly 30 to 50% higher than what we have now. And I asked him what could be the reason. And he said what's happening is that researchers are more interested in producing crops that have longer shelf lives, crops that are bigger, crops that are more appealing to the eye, than crops that are healthy, than crops that are full of nutrients, than crops that are juicy, than crops that are, are more resourceful. And so the genetic print for sweet, genetic print for size, genetic allele for allele, the position where those genes are located on the gene table or on the gene graph for long shelf lives are so substituted for for taste. They are substituted for the nutritious content. So what that means is when you go to the market and you admire a very big, robust tomato and you take it home, the chances are that in as much as big as that tomato is, it's not as nutritious as that tiny cherry tomato that you've known all your life. But because the tiny one doesn't seem to be very economically viable, the demand for it is not as much as the big. Researchers are going for bigger ones, consumers are going for bigger ones. So those are the issues. No wonder there is a growing increase, economic increase in the pharmaceutical industry for multivitamins. We eat all kind of foods, but we have to still supplement with multivitamins to continue. I need you to help me mute yourself. So while such processes are seen via the Green Revolution, which has essentially given us room for monocultures, evidence continues to show that that has also caused a variety of economic, environmental, and social problems. It's my hope that after these 3 days of interactions, we will begin to see these challenges and take concrete steps to address them, especially through smallholder farmers. So let's go on. The topic I would like us to look at today, soils. We talked about soils earlier, remember, during the introduction. There's a picture here. I don't know if you can see it clearly on your screen. Essentially what is there, it says healthy soils support ecosystem functions. And he itemized some of these key functions in 4 polygons. He says water storage plus filtrations. He talks about carbon capture storage, talks about biological functions and diversity, and importantly, it talks about productive capacity. Soils are the cornerstones of every ecosystem. Women will appreciate this more statement I'm about to make. A soil is like a womb. It takes everything that is dropped on it and it gives it life. In other words, it's full of life and vitality. It's fertile. It's healthy. For a soil to be truly a soil, it should be able to take any junk. And when I mean any junk, be it metal. If you've been to the dustbin, my people have a proverb. They say the wealthiest place on earth is the dustbin, where people go to throw trash, not knowing that this trash are wealth. And that's true. When you go to a dustbin, you see all kind of trash. But what is going on there is the soil showing its liveliness. The soil takes that trash, turns it to manure. And one day that same dustbin, someone will go there to pack it to go and put in his farm. Or someone will go there and farm and be so excited that he will reap 10, 20 folds. Why? Because the soil was able to take those dead things, those decomposing things, those trash that you felt were useless, and they began to make life out of it. So soils are the cornerstones of every of an ecosystem. It's reflective of the productive potential of every environment. To have a healthy and thriving agriculture that guarantees zero hunger, as we read in the 17 goals, remember at the beginning, we must view soils as a living system that must be invested in and sustained. Allow me to dwell here a bit. As climate smart agronomists, when you go to interact with farmers, one of the key areas you will be spending your time on teaching these farmers on is how they manage and maintain their soils. Women can understand how they invest on their hair. They spend money buying oil to make sure that their hair is not dry, their scalp is not dry, their hair doesn't break. See, that's investment. That's how a farmer thinks. What do I put in my soil to make it healthy? There are two things, soil health and soil fertility. I will share a blog article after this meeting to the WhatsApp group. It talks about how to achieve a disease suppressive soil. Wow, so there are soils that can suppress disease, like the ones we mentioned in Kaduna. It's been so battered and destroyed, it no longer is able to suppress disease. So everything that comes, for lack of a better way, forgive me to use the analogy, like an advanced HIV patient, any disease that comes goes because the immune system is weak. So the soil is truly a living system. It has an immune system, which are layers upon layers of microorganisms that protect it. And when we dump in our chemicals, dump in our weedicides, herbicides, insecticides, we're destroying these layers of safety, layers of security for the soil. And any disease that comes goes. So when we have this knowledge, we'll better be able to advise our farmers. There's a chemical you are using in your farm that destroys your soil's health, that destroys your soil immune system, and therefore any disease in the soil will manifest. And so you can guide him better, not essentially to stop or throw away his practice, but to make the right decision. And by doing that, you're teaching him a smarter way to farm. So the soil provides the nutritional support frame for life on Earth. Healthy soils contain lots of life and living activities that continue to recycle energy and nutrients and store away carbon. We'll talk about carbon sequestration very soon. You know, I mentioned the dustbin, remember, that soil takes life, takes death, takes anything and turns it to life. And so when we destabilize by our actions, maybe how we expose the soil to excessive sun, how we cut down the trees, how we burn the mulch in the farm. Remember the picture earlier from the farmer who spread maize in his field after harvesting them. There's something he's trying to achieve there. He's trying to retain moisture. Anyone remember mulching in agriculture? He's trying to, we understand that, oh, this is dry season. If this soil remains bare and exposed to the sun, it will be scorched. It will be so hot, nothing will survive in it. And remember, in our elementary agriculture, worms, earthworms, crickets, microorganisms, both macro and micro, the activities of these insects and these microbes, you know, are the ones that chew leaves, like earthworms, chew leaves, make holes in the earth, in the soil for aerations. As they go through those holes, they are churning out waste of vegetables and organic waste from their pool. And that's how they are able to manure and create aeration and improve the soil structure and texture and composition. Remember, during our training, earlier this year, one of the staffs was able to tell us that in those days, their fathers used to tell them any soil you want to buy, any land you want to buy for agriculture, if you go there, anyone remember, and you don't see earthworms, a lot of earthworms, if you don't see a lot of earthworm pools, don't buy the land, it's not fertile. That's a layman way of saying they can use earthworms as bioindicators to tell that the soil is rich. No wonder when you move around our farms these days, you hardly see earthworms. You can count a few. You don't even see the earthworms. If there are earthworms there, you see a lot of their feces, their poo. You know, that earthworm mound, that poo, they pull out very early hours of the morning. Why? Because we burnt them all out with chemicals. And so the climate smart approach is calling us to embrace a new alternative, you know. So there's a picture here. It talks about the link between the soil, there's water, and food, and agriculture. And if there is no harmony between these three, there is a breakdown in the structure and the safety of the soil. If man is abusing the soil with excessive use of chemicals, excessive use of waste, excessive building, excessive falling of trees, it impacts the soil. The water in the soil will be polluted. The water in the soil will not sustain agriculture. And because agriculture is not sustained, the soil can produce healthy food. And so as we continue to interact, we will learn how to use simple soil test kits to be able to tell a farmer, oh, your soil is acidic. This is what you should do to make your soil less acidic. For example, cut in more organic waste. Oh, plant legumes this year and circle them across. You know, the good thing with our practice in Nigeria, God has blessed us so much. We don't need to wait a year to practice crop rotation. For example, what's obtainable in the north central Nigeria is that you can farm your cereal. But importantly, you see that we are able to do the crop rotation the same year because the world is changing. Our population is growing. The resource available is very bigger. We can't wait a year to cycle crops. We can't practice shifting cultivation anymore. Can I be heard? If I can be heard, please unmute and just respond. I want to be
Yes,
sure
yes.
you're there.
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
So we're hearing you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, that's good. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So importantly, we need to understand how to care for our soil. We need to understand that our soil is a resource we need to invest in. Whatever we're putting in there, we need to look at it critically. Am I using too much urea? As we go on, hopefully tomorrow, we'll talk about the integrated plant nutrient management system. We'll talk about integrated plant nutrient management protocols. And earlier during the year, we talked about that in one of the trainings, where farmers will now begin to gradually reduce the excessive use of urea, excessive use of herbicides. This morning, while preparing for this training, I also learned, I read something very interesting. One of the challenge with weeds that we are experiencing as farmers is that, for example, if you're growing maize and you space your maize seeds too much, there's room for weeds to grow where there is no maize. In other words, the space there, some nature occupies vacuum. And so what conservation agriculture is, or climate smart approach is recommending, is that you plant your maize such that at the end of 2-3 weeks to a month, when the entire maize have grown, the maize leaves form a canopy under the soil so that no weeds below have access to sunlight to grow. And by just simple practice of proper spacing of your seeds, using maize, for example, or rice, you staved off weeds without depending essentially on excessive herbicides. Now, where herbicides now come in is that of course, there will still be some stubborn weeds who will struggle through, or pending the 2 to 3 weeks when the maize is still thickening up to cover the shade, you can now targetedly apply your herbicides, or go in if the farm is not so large to manually weed. You know, simple knowledges like this is what we're talking about climate smart, is what we're talking about conservation. But because we are so stuck in our old ways, because we are creatures of habits, all we do is, we just plant maize. We know weeds are sure to come. When they come, we burn them out. And we're not taking time to reflect on the consequences. And so we move on. Let me talk briefly on the image on the screen. We remember from our elementary science or agriculture or biology, carbon cycle, and how is carbon important to our topic. You know, one of the most important greenhouse gas here, I mean, one of the gases in the atmosphere that is destroying the ozone layer, one of the gases in the atmosphere that is making the world hotter, and of course, causing a lot of diseases, because plants get into that over time as we interact. Plants respond to heat stress in a lot of ways. When the environment is very hot, plants, all they want to do is quickly grow fruit and die, because they know they will soon die, and they don't want to die without producing seeds. That's nature's design on them. because if they're able to produce seeds, they can continue to be productive. So what they are interested in, they are not interested in the size of the seeds. All they are interested in is how fast can I produce seeds and die, because this place is so hot. And so when the environment is very hot, it has an impact on productivity. And so climate smart agricultural practices is calling on how do we manage our environment that we can, at least if we can't manage the entire of Gombe, we can manage a microclimate within our farms where the environment is not so hot. In one of the manuals I shared to the training, we'll talk about it to the WhatsApp group. I don't know if you've looked at it. You know, one of the key areas of managing excessive release of carbon pollution into the atmosphere is very simple. God blessed us with trees who are able to trap carbon through the process of nitrogen and fix it in the soil. That aspect of carbon cycle, don't ever, if you don't get any other aspect, learn it, which is very practical to us. Anyone heard of carbon sequestration? It's big grammar for the process of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is very important, not just for the knowledge that it produces oxygen, water, and takes off CO2 from the environment, but importantly, that's not nature's way of cleaning the atmosphere of carbon. And what does it do with this carbon? It uses it to produce starch, and it fixes the rest in the land. We'll get to no-till, to little-till, and some of the benefits. There is also a very important word now in agriculture that is called carbon kidnapping. It's just a simple term for carbon sequestration. Through the process of photosynthesis, we are able to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. And that CO2 doesn't disappear. The plants use it to fix starch. And the starch, some part of it is stored in the soil. And that's why we're understanding as farmers that we also contribute to CO2 emission when we excessively till the soil, because the starch that is stored in decomposing plants' roots, the starch that is fixed in form of secretion from plant roots, we expose it and it comes back to the atmosphere and it contributes to global warming. So that aspect of carbon cycle is the part I want to focus on. The other ones, yes, we know them. We know the whole process of gaseous exchange from ruminants, car exhaust, industrial exhaust, all come to the atmosphere. Plants trap them through the leaves and the activity of sun for energy. You know, photosynthesis fix carbohydrate, water, and oxygen is the byproduct which we use to breathe. And then question is, what happens to the CO2? Yes, part of it is part of the carbon molecule in our organic chemistry. But importantly, the plants are able to bury that CO2 it trapped from the atmosphere in a form in the earth. And when, as farmers, thank God for us in this part of the world, we don't practice a lot of mechanized farming, but we're beginning to see, beyond the fact that the tractors produce a lot of waste from their exhaust, when you till the earth excessively, we'll come to that no-till as I talked. There is an increasing knowledge now is teaching us not to till every year. It's a very important aspect of climate smart farming. Our farmers, you know, practice these things, but they don't know or know the benefit. And as trainers, we need to inform them so they can do it more. When you travel the north, you realize that some farmers, when the first rain comes, all they do is they just scratch the earth and plant. They don't till the earth. They don't cultivate it. They don't use their hoes to dig it because the heaps from last year are still there and the grasses have not come. And then when the grasses begin to emerge, or sometimes even before the grasses emerge, the crops have come up. And by doing that, what they've done, number one, is that they've saved themselves cost that they'll use to till whether tractors or manually, number one. Number two, they've saved the earth. They've made a climate smart decision by not tilling, or by tilling minimally by just using their hoes as they do to plant beets. Why? Because the carbon that is trapped in the soil, they won't expose it. The microorganisms and the earthworms that are in the soil, they won't expose it to be destroyed or to expose it to chemicals. So it's a very important aspect of climate smart farming, little to no till. In other words, essentially this approach, I want us to clearly know this and note it, is not calling to ban tilliness at all. There's certain crops you will have to till. But what he's saying is that you mustn't always till your soil for all crops or always till your soil. For example, if I'm a farmer and I intend to plant maize in my field, early rains next year, and during the dry season, my field is clean, and my heaps or ridges from last year are still visible and clear, You don't need to spend money or resources to till the soil. The ridges from there, of course, farmers will argue, but the hip is stunted and strong. Well, your maize roots don't need so much space to grow. They are just very small. So by just using your hole, you know the right spacing, the field is clean, you just plant. As your maize grow and you harvest, if you need to bring in a different crop, for example, like soybeans, you also don't need to till because you don't need the soybean roots. What you need is the beans on it. We will come to that aspect of some of these climate smart decisions and mistakes farmers make. For example, when you look at soybeans, the nitrogen fixing ability of soybeans is in the root. The first 5 to 10 cm are below the ground. What our farmers practice when they are harvesting their soybeans is that they go and pull it from the farm and bring it home and beat it, they thresh it. You know, by doing that, they are denying the soil nearly 50 to 80% of the nitrogen that soybeans would have been fixed. What do I mean? The nodulation, the nitrogen fixing activities is on the root. So if you pull it out, like we do in groundnut, you know, but difference with soybeans and groundnut is that the nodulated root, which is around the tap root, is very tiny. As you pull the groundnut out, that aspect, the moment the groundnut begins to peg and fruit, that part begins to decompose. So in groundnut, of course, the harvesting, you have to pull it out and you don't take out the nodules, the root nodules. It stays in the soil and then decompose and releases nitrogen to the soil. We will touch that in nitrogen fixation when we get there, hopefully tomorrow. But for soybeans, by pulling it out, you're denying the soil the nitrogen. You're taking it somewhere else to thresh it. And when you're done, you either feed it off to your animals, for people who keep land animals, animal husbandry, or you just leave it and go away as waste and the herders come and graze it. So another key climate smart practice we need to teach our farmers is that in harvesting soybeans, you don't need to pull the entire plant stock out from the soil. You can harvest like we harvest rice with a sickle. Just pick this region where the beans are attached and gather, and you can go and thresh. And then you leave the remaining 5 to 10 centimeter stock on the ground so that it can rot and fix the nitrogen that is essential. Because if you farm soybeans, for example, saying you're doing crop rotation and you harvest the approach I've been talking about, you've not done anything. Very little or no nitrogen will be fixed in the soil. So we move on. Why soil organic matter is important? Soil organic matter has an overwhelming effect on all soil properties. It consists of three distinctive parts: the living organisms, we've talked about the earthworms, we talked about the crickets, we talked about the microorganisms, the fresh residues, we talked about the vegetable waste, we talked about the plant waste, the organic waste, the cow dung, the poultry droppings, we talked about the third one is well-decomposed residues. So the soil is essentially described as living, the dead, and the very dead. What that essentially is saying is the living part, which is the plants and the animals and the microorganisms that are actively, working to decompose the dead, which is the residues, the leaves, the fallen leaves, the grasses that we wet off, the animal waste, the dead animals, the animal droppings we took to the farms, and importantly, these residues, this organic waste that has been produced in the farm. And so this picture to the far right, if it's same on your screen, clearly represents that when for these fall to the earth, decompose, microorganisms decompose them, and these leaves produce the necessary organic waste in the right environment, back to those same plants. That is why a lot of farmers just plant fruit trees and don't worry about manuring them. Mr. Shoaibu, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Okay, maybe we give
Sorry,
others a few minutes to reconnect. I lost connection, and I don't know if every other one also lost.
Yes, I didn't. We are having network problem. That's why. But we have been hearing you since you have started earlier.
We are not hearing you.
We can. Hello.
Hello, sir. No, we can hear you.
We can hear you, sir.
Hello, sir. We can hear you, sir.
Hello?
Hello. We can hear
Hello, we
you,
can
sir.
hear you, sir.
Hello. Hello. But I think he's not there. Or he's no longer there. We are only 6 in number now. We are only 6 in number.
Yes, but the one is present now. Maybe she will brief us.
Okay, let's just give him some minutes. Maybe he's having network problem.
Not maybe. I believe it is. Let's just hear from them.
Okay.
They know better.
Please, sir, just continue.
Mr. Benjamin.
Yes, having network issues, but I'm back.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. It seems like the facilitator is back.
So sorry for the network. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
We can hear you now.
Guys,
Okay. So network challenge. Has everyone joined back?
Not all of us. Mr. Benjamin.
Yes, I can hear you, Ma.
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
So
Yes,
I
sir,
was recommending that if you could find a time today when the network is good, and maybe you, with just one of your assistants as a participant, record it, then we now share the recording. But if you did it on WhatsApp or YouTube, it will then be seen outside the meeting, so that you don't need internet to watch it. It will then become just a video. We watch it, then we meet to discuss it. So it will be a 30 minutes discussion.
Okay, so essentially, do we stop the meeting? Or we're almost at our time today. If we can round this up, then.
No, I'm not talking of. I'm saying today where you have been in and out. It would be nice if you could record today's one, even if it's a shorter version. Do you understand?
The remaining class or just this one?
Don't worry, I'll call you, and I'll call you when your training is over. We'll talk about it.
Okay, okay. But is the network stable now?
Yes, sir. Better.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The network is stable. We are all back.
Okay. So we're almost done with this class. I just go through the remaining slides, and then we can have time to interact on what we've been talking about. So characteristics of a healthy soil. Healthy soils are created by the interactions between the chemicals, the physical, and the biological aspect of the soil. We talked extensively about that. Physical properties of the soil talks about the nature of the soil particles, talks about the structure of the soil and how either big, how rich, how large, or how compacted the soil is. The biological aspect, of course, is the living aspect. We talked about the microorganisms, talked and so let's look at some common conservation agricultural practices or some climate smart agricultural practices. Remember I mentioned earlier before the internet was interrupted about minimum to little or no till. So it's listed here. It says minimum mechanical soil disturbance, little to no till, mulching. We talked about mulching. We talked about crop rotation. We'll talk about crop diversification away from monocropping. I think we mentioned that too, but I just pointed out the mixed cropping. The practice of mixed cropping. I'll give you an example. Imagine a farmer who is practicing monocropping of 1 hectare of maize in his farm, and he's realized that over the years his maize crops are not doing very well. He's thinking of he cannot let go of his entire maize farm for a different crop because his market or his demand is for maize grains. So one essential and more modern approach to doing that is for you to find a way to nicely mix your maize crops. And you know, when you intercrop, say, beans or groundnut with maize, because maize have a lot of leaves, they shade off or form a canopy underneath. We'll see that in our next training. They form a canopy underneath of the beans or the groundnut, and they starve off the groundnut just like those weeds we talked about from sunlight. And the groundnut won't do fine, the beans won't do fine, but the maize above will do well. So a more modern or a more climate smart approach to mixed farming that has been introduced, you know, is called crop trammeling. I'll share the details with us in our training and also materials to the WhatsApp for us to look at. What this essentially is calling for is that you can have 2 to 3 ridges of maize, and in between, before the next 2 to 3 ridges of maize, you can have one straight ridge of beans or groundnut. And you know, so the maize enjoys its space to itself of the ridges of 2 or 3 ridges of maize, all alone, mono maize, and then trimlined or intercropped with beans or groundnut. Now, how this helps is that the groundnut will fix nitrogen, Soybeans with fixed nitrogen, or the legumes, be it groundnut, be it soybeans, or be it any other legume, they will fix nitrogen to the cereal crops, and the cereal crops will take advantage of that nitrogen and produce other material, other nutrients for the legumes. So it's a more environmental friendly way to practice. In our trainings, in our practical training, we look at some of those things and how we can begin to introduce it to our farmers to embrace. Then there's integrated weed fertilizer and soil fertility, pest and disease management. And then there's integrated animal system into the farm. Animal husbandry has always been an integral part of crop production. But farmers need to understand that every farmer across North Nigeria understands and appreciates cashin shanu, cow drunks. They understand poultry droppings. But imagine a scenario like it's practiced in India, where every farmer has a head of cow in his farm or in his house. He's not essentially growing these cows or a poultry in his house because he's in need of meat or milk. He understands that the waste from his farm will not be left in the field fallow to waste. He will bring it to feed and fatten his cow. And he understands that his cow will process this waste into organic waste that he will take back to his field. You see the interdependence. So another climate smart approach to farming that we need to begin to teach farmers is they need to have, some already are doing, like I mentioned, remember when we started on knowledge, some already are doing these things, but they don't know yet, or they don't appreciate it that much yet. But imagine a scenario where every farmer has a head of cow or two. They have poultry, not a very commercial one, but the essential importance is that, oh, I have waste from my farm, be it bad grains, be it decomposing organic waste, maybe from my maize shellings. I'll turn this thing into my animals, animals at home, and I can bring the waste back to the farm. So it's important that we discuss this aspect. So we've had quite some time to talk. Network was a challenge. We've always known as Nigerians, network would be a challenge, but we will find ways to overcome these things. We've come to the end of this presentation. I'll just take a few minutes to recap all that we've talked about. Key things, key takeaways that if you didn't get anything at all, you should get in a more practical terms in terms of climate smart farming. Remember, we talked about no-till to little-till farming. Remember that we talked about carbon sequestration, how plants are able to work, take CO2 off the environment and make the environment cooler, make the environment more friendly. We talked recently just now about the need for farmers, smallholder farmers, to embrace animal husbandry so that they can use the waste from their farms instead of abandoning them in the fields to grow and feed and fatten their cattle and their animals, and in turn the waste goes to the farm. As we go on, we'll talk about compost making, we'll talk about organic fertilizer making. We'll look at some of those things in more practical terms when we have time to meet. And then initially we talked about mulching, we talked about tilling. Remember that we rushed through some of that, but importantly, the essence of the training is to bring us to today, if we've not learned anything or if we need to grab some things, to understand that we have to begin to think about alternative ways to production of food. We need to understand that our activities as men have influence on our environment. It has influence on us. Remember, we talked about the need to use less synthetic farm inputs and to begin to embrace a more environmental friendly ones. At this moment, I will go off the mic, and if anyone has questions, if anyone has contributions, this will be the time to ask those questions so we can trash them. Then we will move on to the next activity before we end this meeting. Thank you.
Hello, sir.
Thank you, Nathan. Go ahead.
Yes. Good morning, sir. So my question is, in a situation whereby you are trying to advise the farmer to be a smart farmer and he's not being convinced because that's not the way you have been doing this farming, what way can you convince that farmer? In what way?
Thank you for the question, Nathan. Very practical question. From experience, I like to address this question from experience. From experience, one of the things I have seen that worked or will work is when you, first of all, are patient with the farmer. And second, begin to find alternative ways to show the farmer a practical way you've done it that worked for you. It will take a stack full to see something practically work and argue it. That's why initially I was recommending that we have or rather we begin to look in future to set up demonstration farms across this region where we're working with these farmers. Because it's not a one-off thing. Most farmers are arguing or will argue because they've tried something and it didn't work. Maybe they didn't get it right initially. Maybe someone manipulated them to make a profit and they felt that this won't work. But if you are able to show him through your farm, through a farmer you are working with to train, because as an extension staff, you will interact with a lot of farmers closely. You will know their farms. You would have advised Mr. A, Mr. B, and if you have worked for Mr. A, you can refer him to it. You can take him and show him through the process. It's a painful process, but it pays off on the ending, I can guarantee you.
Noted, sir. I get it. Thank you.
Please feel very free. Ask questions.
Mr. Benjamin, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Mine relates to the soil cover you talked about.
Yes, ma'am.
I didn't catch the alternative to cropping groundnut and maize. What's the alternative?
Okay,
You said
ma'am.
there's a new way.
Okay. The initial crop cover, I showed a picture in the beginning of the training, if you recall. Let me go back there and just put the picture. There's one here. What is going on here essentially is that the farmer, this is the dry season farm being set up. And during the dry season, the soil is usually very dry because irrigation is done manually. And also the crops will go through a lot of drought. So what the farmer is doing here is he has harvested his maize and he's not burning them. He's not feeding them off to cows. He's not allowing cows to go into his field, but he's using them to mulch the field. By mulching, he's covering the exposed soil and giving room for moisture from his manual irrigation to be trapped. He's also giving room for this mulch to decompose naturally and enrich his soil. Mind you, these stalks of maize are the evidence of his fertilizer he has spent money to invest that has grown. So what he's doing is he's returning his investment back to the soil by this practice. So by the time the vegetable he's growing, this farmer is trying to grow cucumber. By the time his cucumbers come up, they will have decomposing manure to begin to feed with. That's number one. Number two, the soil will be less scorched and the soil will have more environment for microorganisms to act. So I'll go to the second question you asked earlier. Sorry, remind me of the question again. You were mentioning.
I was saying, instead
Yes,
of cropping groundnut and maize,
yes,
what's the alternative?
okay. So there is a new technology. It's a method of farming. It's called crop tramline. The spelling is Tramline. You can research on it. Tramline.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. So what this essentially encourages is, you know, when you intercrop in a bid to maybe enjoy nitrogen fixation from a legume, when you intercrop, say, maybe beans or soybeans and groundnut in your maize farm or in your rice farm or in your guinea corn farm or millet, the leaves of the maize, they grow way above the groundnut or the beans. So they starve the beans below or the groundnut from oxygen, from sunlight. So that ends up with the farmer only enjoying the cereal crops he cultivated. The legumes you have little or nothing to harvest from it. So the alternative approach that is more modern, more environmental friendly, and more climate smart encourages that the competition for light and space will be addressed. How will you do that? You will plant your maize on, let's assume that on the pictures on the screen, you can see the first 3 ridges. Imagine that it is maize First 3 ridges, by ridges, I mean the lines of maize stalk that is lined straight there. So I count 1, 2, 3. The first 3, imagine it is a maize row. This 4th one will be a straight line of beans. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this 4th straight line will be a straight line of beans. Then the 5th line, 6th and 7th will be a straight line of maize. Now, what you are doing is that you are giving a clear intercrop, dedicating a ridge to beans. Because of the spacing, the beans will have its sunlight. It will still equally fix nitrogen. And the maize, because of the spacing, will not burn off or shade off the beans. So it's more of a smart way to arrange your farm such that each crop is not out-competed. I think we will need to set up such demonstration. It's a trending way to manage resources. Now, such farmers will not spend a lot of money applying nitrogen to the farm because the legume is fixing nitrogen for the cereal crop.
So are you saying you don't support which method is it they call it? This one that
monocropping.
they crop only maize but very close.
Monocropping.
Kakawa. Sasakawa.
Is that a word for local word for monocropping, Mark?
Not monocropping. There was a methodology adopted by the Ministry of Agriculture, which was promoted, which is the fact that don't even intercrop at all. Just plant only maize, but they are so close that they do not allow for soil erosion. You maximize the use of the field, but the only thing is then you have to come and do crop rotation, that you get a better yield.
Yes, that's I strongly agree with this method. This is for when you are monocropping. By monocropping, I mean when you are farming only one type of crop. And also that your soil, number 1, is fertile. Number 2, the farmer has the resource to apply nitrogen to his soil. So this method you mentioned, promoted by the ministry, excellent. I recommend it. I highly, highly recommend it. But there are some environments, the soil are not very fertile. Farmers will even tell you they spent a lot of money to fix, to buy urea and apply, and the soil is not fertile. So in these environments, what is recommended is that you don't fully monocrop. You twerk it a bit. You introduce legumes intermittently in between the cereal crops. That's number 1. Another environment where this technique has been very helpful is environments that are known to be prone to drought. You know, beans and other legumes, they form their bushy canopy underneath the maize. They are able to protect the maize roots from excess scorch of the sun. When you travel further north in Nigeria, I think this is a method that can be encouraged. As soon as you harvest the maize, the remaining space, you circle in the second version, maybe beans at that point, or maybe you continue with the same groundnut. So you see, is a more efficient way to utilize the soil than a year in, year out of just a monocrop. Is that okay, Ma?
Yes, sir. Thank you. That's excellent.
Okay, sir. I have a question, sir.
Yes, please go ahead.
Sir, based on farmyard manure, usually small animals is of more quality than the larger animals, like poultry litter and cow. Most farmers use poultry litter than cow dung. So my question is that between farmyard and compost manure now, which one am I going to recommend a farmer? Which one work faster?
Okay. Thank you for the question. When it comes to farmyard manure, from research, the most nitrogen rich is the manure from goats and chicken in terms of the nitrogen composition. Now, there are a lot of factors, but in terms of nitrogen composition, that from goat and from poultry droppings is the richest. But farmyard manure, all of them are good. I would recommend you to recommend to your farmers that they use any of them. But a critical aspect of farmyard manure that you need to warn your farmers about is that they should ensure that this manure is fully decomposed. Now, how do I mean, or what do I mean? A farmer, let me give you a very typical example. A farmer who is cultivating maize and is gathering cow dung from his farm or from a neighbor or from another source and bringing to his farm. One of the things he will be experiencing every year are new species of weeds. Where are those seeds of weeds coming from? The ruminant's digestive system, it's not complex enough to kill insects and weed seeds. It equally come with a number of diseases. So just carrying your cow dung because you want to manure your farm or poultry droppings to your farm might be a vector or a carrier for disease to your farm, or might be increasing the weed composition in your farm. But when you properly decompose this manure, when you see a properly decomposed manure, you should be able to tell, because it's first very dark. You don't see anything growing on it. You don't see weeds growing on it. You don't see mushrooms growing on it. What you clearly will see are earthworms churning it, or those big maggots. And so that's a properly decomposed manure. In that state, all the nutrients have been decomposed. All the diseases have been destroyed. A stable ecosystem of microorganisms have been set in that will continue to in your farm when you move it there. So it's important to warn farmers in a bid to use, for example, I think what's common in the north is poultry droppings and essentially cow dungs. A farmer has to be careful. I think we need to look at that practical aspect. How do I decompose fully my poultry droppings? How do I decompose fully my cow dungs before I take them to the farm? Farmers have shared how they use poultry droppings in their farms, and it burns their farms. Why? Because poultry dropping, it's highly nitrogenous. So if it's not fully decomposed, it will burn your farm. That's one hazard. So fully decomposing it's not rocket science. You might need to create a pit behind your house or a shade where you dump it and cover it with a dark polythene. With the absence of light, active microorganisms will set in to decompose it. Then you sprinkle little water from time to time, you turn it over until it's fully decomposed, fully black, fully soil. You see it, you think it's soil, you won't see the grasses again. Thank you.
I have questions, sir.
Please go ahead.
Okay, sir. Initially, you made mention of zero tillage or no tillage.
Yes.
And if you look at the most region of the northern part of Nigeria, yes, most of the lands are very compacted. But sir, in a place where the soil is compacted, is it possible to practice this zero tillage farming? Why? Because sometimes, or the essence of this tilling the land is for effective root penetration and aeration. That's my question, sir.
Excellent. I agree with you. In some regions, when the soil is very compact, which is a challenge with tilling, because for every time you till the soil, we will look at that hopefully tomorrow. For every time when you till the soil, you are exposing the soil structure to be more compact, because when your vehicles drive in the farm, when cattle walk in the field, when rain falls, because the particles of the soil have been more exposed, compaction becomes very easy. So I agree with you. In events where the environment is too compact, till. But till with the knowledge that you shouldn't be tilling too often. Only till when the soil is too compact. Also, it also depends on the crop you are planting. For example, if I'm to plant granite and the soil is too compact, if I go ahead and practice no-till, I'm shooting myself in the leg, because the granite will not be able to peg properly because the soil is too strong. And if they peg, when I'm harvesting, they will be stunted in the ground. I won't be able to dig it out. I'll spend more money, on labor trying to harvest. But if I'm planting something like soybeans, if I'm planting something like maize, little or no till is fair. By little here, I mean you could just scratch the surface. If you go further into the north, or if you look at northern parts of Africa, a new approach to farming that is being encouraged Farmers, because the area doesn't have water and the water that comes is very little, are encouraged to no longer till, but to just make sufficient holes that are sizable enough to take manure and the seed. So when you make that hole, is a depression. The picture on the screen actually has that, where we are demonstrating this to farmers. There's a depression in between each of the maize stalks you are seeing. That depression can contain enough water, no matter how little. That depression can contain just the amount of fertilizer that it needs. When it rains, you don't wash it off. Just the amount of cow dung it needs to wash it off. So there are more modern approaches. And the good thing about this farm method is once you set your farm in this way, like this very farmer, next year it becomes easier to continue. The setup is what is difficult. If you look further on this picture, there is a dark patch further away in the middle. I don't know if you could see where the mouse is. That's cow dung there. So on each of these holes, the farmer is able to fill it up with the cow dung he needs and plants just the seeds he needs. So in this way, efficiency and management in resources, if he needs to put fertilizer, just one small spoon on each of these holes, than the way we broadcast, and some of the fertilizer will fall on stones, fall on grasses, fall away from the crops. You see, efficiency is more encouraged here. This is more obtainable in an environment where we're dealing with smallholder farmers. If it's a very large farm, you might have to go through the stress of direct top dressing for each of the crops. I hope this answered you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Hello, sir. I have a question.
I can't hear you. Are you asking your question?
Hello, sir.
Aha. I can hear you now. Say again.
Okay, my question is, yesterday there are some farmers that I mobilized. They even asked me about there is a plant that will disturb their cowpea, which is a striga plant.
Mm.
So my experience is controlling striga in the farm is only applying 2,4-D. But what they are saying is they are even still asking me that if they apply 2,4-D for that certain striga plant, it will affect their beans too. So is there any solution that I can maybe recommend it for them?
Striga is a very interesting pest, weed pest, particularly menacing in the north. When it comes to striga, we'll look at it. The approach to controlling it is more of an integrated management than just looking for a product to clear it off. Because the ones you are going to burn off with 2,4-D today, they are going to drop off seeds when you burn them off. And as soon as the rains come next year, they will express themselves. A very important material that has been developed all over the world, I encourage you to research, is neem. Dogoyaro is the director indica. The cake from the oil extract has been shown to have high suppressant effects on striga seed germination rates. A number of studies, if you chat me later, I can share those studies to you to see. So yes, Dogoyaro, as God has blessed us, is a crop that is highly, highly abundant all over the north. Farmers who have it can collect the seed.
Sorry for interrupting. So in north side, Dogoyaro is different with the neem tree. You say neem tree and you are saying still Dogoyaro.
Which is neem? Which is Dogoyaro, sir?
The neem is as a director indica.
Okay. Dogoyaro is which one?
The Dogoyaro is Eucalyptus sinensis.
Yes.
Okay. I'm learning that. We call Dogoyaro here. Neem is what we call Dogoyaro here. But essentially, good, I call the scientific name. So you're able to identify as a director indica. But it's a common tree in the north. Is that correct?
Okay, I get you, sir. Yes.
Yeah. So if farmers are able to get access to the seeds of as a director indica, they can collect these seeds, crush them, and spray the crude extract from the crush in their farms before cultivation. Now, the active ingredient in this Dogoyaro, which is azadirachtin, is able to suppress the germination rate. Essentially, what it does is that it reduces the viability of the Striga seeds. But in an event where they are not able to have access to that, we have products which we are privileged to be the makers. We have products. In fact, the rich yield fertilizer we make, one of the reasons we blend it with neem cake is because of the Striga challenge. So encourage farmers who you are interacting with, who are having challenges with Striga, to blend in rich yield fertilizer to their fertilizer blend. And there are also neem oil extract and a number of other products that they can use. Now, I'm not saying these products automatically removes Striga if you use them, but what I'm saying is that it starves up their germination rate, and over time, they will be eradicated from your fields. I hope this helps.
Yes, thank you, sir.
I'm enjoying that there are a lot of questions. It tells me that the time we've had together has been productive. I will still encourage further questions. We have the time. Some of these questions are provoking other topics, so, which is cool.
I have a question, sir.
Okay, ma.
Hello, sir.
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. For some of our dry season farmers that will be planting rice, they are starting with a wet farm that has grasses. So the question is, if they are not supposed to burn, how should they eradicate the rice, the wheat, the grass in readiness for planting? Some of those places already have moisture and the grasses are doing well. Some of them are well established. So if you say don't burn, then what is the alternative? Thank you.
The obvious alternative would be for them to use herbicides more. But in the bid to use herbicides, they have to be careful to use the precise and recommended dosage in the farm. Now, a careful and calibrated application of herbicide is not as harmful or as destructive as an indiscriminate use. You interface with farmers, which is what I recommend to our climate smart agronomists. As you go around, let farmers know that if they're able to lay their hands on an original and herbicide that is effective, if they follow the recommended dose with the recommended environment. For example, depending on the brand, when the active ingredient, which is glyphosate, the systemic herbicide that takes 4 to 5 days to 1 week to kill grasses, if you stick to the recommended dosage per hectare or per plot or per acre, the grasses will die. But the challenge is our farmers want to apply herbicide today and come and see the results tomorrow. So a farmer should be able to plan ahead and properly execute his plans. Then the second option is, if the rice farm is not so large, consider manual weeding. And the third thing, Ma, is that if the farm is flooded, water is a herbicide on its own. If the farm is properly flooded and their rice waste, which is the stock from after the rice has been harvested, and you booger it and remove the rice, those materials too are equally helpful. You can use them to cover the surface of the farm if the farm doesn't have so much weed. I guarantee you, just by covering them, those rice waste will cover the grasses off from the sun, and the grasses will lose access to photosynthesis and begin to die off. So there are a number of things, but because farmers are impatient and farmers don't see the results immediately, they are tempted to do all kinds of things. But I think the immediate way will be to properly and adequately apply the precise and recommended amount of an original herbicide. And
okay,
yes, ma'am.
So in this particular case, the farmer did not crop the farm. He allowed it to lie fallow. which means there's a lot of wheat and no rice stock. So my first thinking was that he can use the maize, the rice farm. He has maize neighboring the rice farm, so he can use the corn stalk to cover the rice field, which is wet, but by starving them of sunlight, like you said, I believe that it will die and they will at least become soft. Then you can manually uproot the remaining ones. Would that work?
Yes, it will. It will.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, sir. Sir, I have a question. Hello, sir.
Yes, go ahead. I'm with you.
Okay, sir. We're talking about it's a typical example of the rice farm, sir. The soil is actually wet, and sometimes you begin to see some tiger nut. And whenever the soil is wet, then the tiger nut, they also grow very well. You uproot them, you give them 2 days, 2 to 3 days, they grow again. Sometimes they grow faster than the crops. So in that issue of that tiger nut, they usually call it Cyprus rotundus. How can you actually do? Does it mean that maybe sometimes even if you use manual, maybe you use your hand and you pick them, you uproot them, sometimes they grow again. So because I have experience with this, we try, but at the later end, it stops. As long as the soil is wet, then you see them growing and germinating. So I don't know, what can you actually say regarding this?
Tiger nut, thanks for the question. Tiger nut is a very important weed in this situation where it's competing with the rice. I think professionally, 2 things I would recommend. As a farmer, you should be able to determine whether the stress is worth it to continue to battle with tiger nuts and rice. And if tiger nuts are overcoming your rice, then you should make an economic decision, which is to what other crop can I grow here that tiger nut will be a stress, or even the presence of tiger nut weeds will not stress it. It mustn't be rice. You can grow something else there. That's number 1. Number 2, the only way to manage tiger nut is a stressful approach, which is to ensure that you dig out the nut, not just the grass. If you take out the grass, the nut is beneath the soil. It's a rhizome to continue to sprout. So if you have the luxury of time and resources and you can painstakingly go through the farm, digging out the nuts, it's a matter of time you would have eradicated tiger nuts. Entirely what you are trying to do is to do like execute a micro extinction of tiger nuts from your farm, which is eradicating the nuts, not by pulling out the grasses. You know, if you study the anatomy of that grass, the early rhizomes is just what you are seeing, which you pull out easily. The major nut is still below. So long as you keep pulling the early rhizomes out and you don't access the nut, it will keep sprouting. Was that helpful?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay. Okay. So we're done today. Any other questions, you can either send them directly to me or leave them on the WhatsApp group. I'm sure to respond. I have an activity I would recommend for all of us. I'm trying to be careful that this training is not entirely academic. It gets us to also participate and to also think. There are a number of things we've talked about today on climate smart agriculture. As you go around today, go around early hours of tomorrow, preparing for our next meeting, identify some of the climate smart agricultural practices you've seen around your environment, note them down, and before we commence the training tomorrow, we'll talk about them. Essentially, it's just for you to tell us those things you've seen. How do you think farmers can improve on them? Were you able to talk to farmers? Also, if you are someone who has a cold feet when it comes to interacting with farmers, take the initiative and talk with them, share some ideas with them, see their response, so that tomorrow when we meet, you can share with us. Some of them were receptive, some were adamant, some were indifferent, some actually walked away. And let's see how we can integrate some of this practical approach and solutions to our online class. That will be it for that. If there's any other thing, I will allow some time for that. Else, we've had quite some time today.
Thank you very much, sir, for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you to you too, and every other person for the patience, for listening, and apologize for the network challenge. These are some things we put up with for an online class.
No problem, sir. Issue of network is something that will happen with everyone at any moment. So thank you for your wonderful presentation. I really appreciate and listen to everything well.
Thank you. Ali, thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We have found this presentation very, very important, and it helps us a lot in so many ways, especially for the issue of these climate changes and related issues. And we look forward, sir, to benefit from what you're going to enlighten us from today on to the end of this program, into the end of this program.
Thank you. Thank you. I will share these slides to the WhatsApp group so that we can independently go through them after this class.
Okay, sir.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, if we don't have any other thing, then we'll call it a day. If there's any concerns, then we'll share it on the WhatsApp group. Thank you.